Back in the week leading up to Christmas, I thought I had strep throat. My sister used to have strep throat, every other week, it seemed like, when I was in school. I never once caught it. And all growing up and a lot of years into adulthood, I never caught hepatitis when it was around strep throat. I had flu once, and I had a 24-hour stomach flu once. Uh, but I thought I had strep throat, and I guess I remember I didn't get blood work done, but I just got looked at, and I remember now. I believe strep throat. They look in the back of your throat, and I think it's the one where you'll have some white spots back there by that deal that hangs down. I forget what you call it, the back of your throat and shit like that. Either that or it's the other way around, where you don't have the white spots. But either way, I thought maybe get some antibiotics. But so strep, I believe, is the one that is from fucking bacteria, so you get antibiotics to get rid of it. So they said that wouldn't do any good because it was a virus. But I had a fever and a cough, bad cough, where like the back of my throat and the roof of my mouth scratched like fucking sandpaper. It hurt real bad to cough, but I couldn't help but cough. And so I had the sore throat. I couldn't even really swallow water. And then it was kind of mild for 3, 4 days. And about after 4 days, about half the day and through the night, and then into the next morning, so half or 3/4 of a day, my lungs were really bad to where you'd pull to get breath like this, and you'd get maybe a third or half of a normal breath doing that. And when I took this medicine my mother brought to me, I tried to ram down the full dose of this liquid. Had a lot of alcohol in it, maybe. Wasn't NyQuil, but, something kind of similar, maybe. But I wanted to ram it all down because I knew I'd have a hard time. I couldn't even really drink water at that time. I got about 2/3 of it down, but it was a big mistake because it choked me so bad. When you are having to try to get your breath and you can't do it, it scares you. It was like that, but eventually caught my breath. But, I had to do it that way or I wouldn't be able to get any medicine down. I was hoping it would help. It might have helped me sleep just a little bit that night. The next morning, I go to a clinic and I couldn't give my information really. Almost had to just write it down because I couldn't speak. The following morning again at a clinic, I could speak a little bit better, but I really couldn't speak. Uh, and so I did have the throat, which was dry, and it was just kind of like the cough going down to my throat. Um, and, uh, um, and the lungs, respiratory. So, and there was no congestion. I usually have sinus shit going on all through the winter and even all year long. Like when I was a kid, I would just suffer with it, not say nothing. And I get above my eyebrow, will be packed tight and look like a big knot. And I was told when I was like 26, went through an inpatient treatment center, went to the doctor with a couple other guys from the place. The doctor wanted to perform a surgery on my sinuses, but I was only in that town for less than a month and he couldn't do it. Um, but I remember telling him that I have an uncle and an aunt. One is not with us anymore. Actually, he's missing. But that was in 1984, so he's obviously not with us. My aunt is still with us, but they both had to have surgeries on their sinuses in their lifetime, so I told them it's a common family thing, but I never did have that. So this was odd, and I specifically remember not having a runny, drippy nose or wet, and not even a head congestion. So this coronavirus, COVID-19, I look at it as like a dry fucking flu, kind of. And a lot of people get aches in their body and whatnot. I look at it if you see what I'm trying to say, as a dry rather than like a wet or damp or tropical type of flu in a sense. I'm not saying I had it, but I'm like a lot of people looking back and wondering if earlier in the year maybe I already had this. I talked to someone at my clinic today, and now that we have restrictions and all this shit going on, uh, akin to martial law for medical reasons, just not quite as severe, of course. And people buying shit at the store and people being nervous somewhat. I talked to her, and because I remember back during that time, mid to late December and January, at this clinic I go to, one person wasn't at work for being sick. The one I seen that day was sick, all with similar things they were feeling and symptoms, but was feeling well enough to come to work, but had two at home feeling the same way. Like her husband and one of her kids stayed home from school, and her husband didn't go to work. And then at the Safeway, I have a friend I talk to that gets the carts and does janitorial and security type work. And at the deli, I got a couple I talk to, and I know another guy that's a Seahawks fan, and my friend that works outside had the same shit. A couple people at the deli. But you see what I'm saying? When you go everywhere you go, and people have the same shit type of deal. We've all had that happen, the same sickness and shit. So, now they claim that we have that going on. I talked to him at the clinic today. Nobody knows one fucking person that's sick, not even with a separate flu, allergy, or even a cold right now. And in my county, we've had 2 people, and the county south of us is still at 0. And the county to the north, and the county, I guess it would be to the northeast, I think the numbers are 10 each. You get a little bit different numbers slightly in different places. And then to the southwest, I think it's 2. But in my county, the first one was at least 3 weeks ago. I think it was 4 weeks ago or more. So that person is back living their life, So we have one case in reality, started maybe 3 days ago. But so back then, just shortly before they started talking this shit, I feel like it went through our area here. You don't like to advertise shit on YouTube or the internet, but I do live in Washington. But I don't live in Seattle exactly or nothing, so, but in this region, the 5 counties I generally travel in, that's a total of like 22 people. And in my county, 2, and like I said, 1 would have been long recovered, and south of me, there's 0 still. And that's a great big spread out, sprawling fucking county. And I've been to the hospital for blood work twice, and to my other clinic twice, and this other clinic 3 or 4 times. And there's nobody there because for other regular things and elective surgeries and appointments, you can do appointments and stuff, but you're not doing surgeries and things that are not necessary to do. I had to put my dentist on hold. I was going to have 2 root canals if I can bring myself to do it, because I have options on that. Do that, and I can try this partial thing and see if it works, or I can just pull everything and have a full denture, But I've been needing to for a while now. We've got it sorted out. Got the money to cover the things I need to, and the things that are covered, got it all sorted out. And who's going to do it? And it was coming up in a couple, 3 weeks, and now all that has to be on hold, like a lot of my other stuff, and having idle hands and shit isn't really doing me any good. But yeah, a lot of people looking back, and yeah, in my area here, and just north is supposed to be so hard hit, and actually the first cases in the country were there and all that shit. But down here, uh, if people had it, it was a little bit before they even started talking about it. But if I had it, and I just say it like this, you have no way of knowing. Even people that get sick now, if they're okay, and they just get over it, and the vast majority of people do. It's just like another sickness or flu or pneumonia. If you're older or if you have COPD, like if my dad was still here, who had COPD and leukemia, blood cancer type of disease. But I seen him after not seeing him for a little while. Stayed a few days at my house, went to my uncle's, and stayed with me again a few days. And then my mother and I took him halfway, and then they met us, and he went home. A couple months later, he got sick, passed away. But the way he was with the COPD, specifically the last couple of years and the last few months especially, there's no way that the way my lungs were for half or three-quarters of a day, that would have been a prolonged thing, and he wouldn't have been able to withstand that. So people sick with other things, and elderly people, or if a real young person or infant or baby, and especially if they have any immune system issues, then yeah, it would be really bad. But that's the case always with pneumonia or something, people who are that way. When you're sick with things, you think, you're going to go to grandma's house, and maybe you say, no, let's not do it until we know for sure none of us are sick. Seems like they could just be an advisory, and that just make it a real strong advisory. Um, and if it got worse, you could close some places and restrict things some, but a real strong advisory, but that's not what we got. But it's just odd that in my area here, that is really supposed to be kind of bad, in the same state where things were supposed to have started, but not in the same counties, but we're real close. That we've got 22, 24 altogether confirmed, and that everyone I see and talk to, that we don't know anyone sick, even with someone with some other sickness. But in last part of December and January, everywhere you went, people were sick or knew people that were. So if it was that, I can say that, yeah, it's one that kind of goes through thick, and everywhere you go, people have one or two at home where they themselves are sick. It was that way. And I say it like this also, that, yeah, you can't know for sure if that's what it was, or if I had it, or if anyone else had that specifically. But if I had those symptoms now, you would assume that I have it. And that's what's being done with a lot of cases, even that they confirm. They assume. There's guys that drive ambulances and paramedics that people have talked to, and even made videos and on the news, even standard news. And they just make the assumption, especially when it comes to making a required 14-day quarantine for someone that's sick. They're going to operate under that assumption. And so the fever is your first thing, really. But the three things are the fever, the dry cough, and the lungs, respiratory. And there's up to 8, 9, maybe even a dozen symptoms that can go along throughout the whole course of it. But those are the three major ones, the first ones to appear, and the ones that every case has. And I think the fourth one is the throat, or maybe there's one, and then the fifth one's the throat. But to me, the dry cough and the sore throat issues go hand in hand. If you have one, you have the other. Because I had the cough, but then the back of my throat and the roof of my mouth were so scratchy like sandpaper, and it hurt so bad to cough, but I couldn't avoid coughing. If I had those symptoms now, uh, those are the three that go with it, and I didn't have congestion or a runny wet nose or a wet cough or phlegm or spit. I couldn't even hardly make saliva, and I couldn't even drink water for a short time, so that wasn't good. You got to be hydrated, especially when you're sick like that. And then the lung issues, respiratory, not in the head, so it was an allergy, no sneezing, no runny nose, no dampness, no phlegm or wet cough, and a flu of another type. It'll be in your head if your nose ain't running and you don't sneeze, then you're all congested and it's packed in there. And if it's not that, but it's respiratory and those three symptoms, even if they don't test you, they operate under the assumption that that's what you have, because basically that's what it has to be. So if I had those symptoms now, there'd be no doubt it would be the assumption. So, if I had that, then that's good, because they argue about whether you get an immunity or not, and guys will say that no, but then they talk about beating the curve and getting a herd immunity. So in one breath they'll say that no, you can't count on an immunity, but then the plan is beating the curve and getting this herd immunity in the next breath. But the way I would look at it is, like any other flu, you can always get a flu again, and you may or may not get that same strain, but I would think you could get that same strain again. But the likelihood of getting it again anytime right away soon is almost zero, or it is zero, I would guess. And of even getting it that same year, be a real low chance. You would certainly have an immunity for a while, for whatever period of time, I would assume, and probably for that entire year, that entire flu season. So if that's what it was, then that's not a bad thing. And that would mean that quite a few people in my surrounding counties I travel in already had it, and so that would be a good reason why they're not having it now. And our flu season is kind of close to passing us by. No one knows anyone that's sick, even with some other sickness. But yeah, that would not be a bad thing if that were the case. Losing my train of thought. I suppose I'll just let it go at that. But a lot of people are looking back, wondering if sickness earlier in the year was this coronavirus. But I certainly had the exact 3 symptoms and one other with the sore throat and shit, and no other symptoms, and none that would rule it out, like the congestion or a phlegmy cough, damp cough, or anything like that. And it went through real heavily. I know what I was going to say is, if it was, what was the experience like? Seems like there was 2 or 3 days where I kind of felt I was sick, but it's where you feel like you're sick, but you're wondering if you for sure are, so it's not a whole lot. Feel like you might have a mild fever or headache and your gut don't feel quite right, whatever. But the 4th day or so, I had a fever, and I think I checked it, and I had like 100.8 or 101.1, not super high. But I think before long I had a 102, 102.1 or something, so that was high enough. For sure you got a fever, and you can tell, you can feel it. And the cough was there by that day, all day and all night. And the last half of that day, the lungs started, and my mom brought the medicine, and my lungs were how they were, and it kept me up most of the night. And the next day I couldn't talk all day long. I could croak a little bit. And the next morning, it was improved just the slightest bit. The next day, it maybe improved by half, and the following day, it was just like that a little bit. Um, but for that day and a half or a little bit longer, the dry cough and the dry throat and not being able to not cough, it was painful. But once it got to the lung and respiratory aspect, I was able to recover from it. And people that aren't able to recover or on their own anyway from that, it can go 12, 14 days, even longer. So those are the symptoms I had, and it was kicking real hard for the 3/4 of a day or so when I had the lung issues, and it wasn't cool at all. Um, and that's me being big, and I'm getting older, but my immune system should be in good shape. I got real nice lungs. I'd never smoked. So anyone else in lesser condition, yeah, that lung thing could be bad. And I still could eat, and I tried to eat soups and things. I didn't feel as much like eating, but I wasn't nauseous or anything. No sneezing, no congested head. I had some aches, but not any that specifically stuck out, like my knees will hurt a lot at times. So they were hurting worse, and some muscle aches in my legs because I have leg problems anyway, and little pains in my elbows and joints a little bit, and those dull aches for about 2 days when I had it the worst with my lungs and stuff. After that, those were mild, but what would happen is for up to a couple weeks altogether, so 10 days or so after that, the lung sickness and stuff, I think it was over by a couple days later, but mild symptoms would hang around and they would recur. Think it's done, and then the next day you've got the headache again, enough to check for a fever, and maybe you have a 99.4 or something, slightly elevated, and a little bit of a cough again. And then the next day again you feel lower, but a couple days later um, you have aches and pains. Goes on for a day or so, but real mild stuff for an additional 10 days. And that's what I went through, if that's what it was. Like I said, if I had it now, that would be the assumption. All right, man.